Hello, everyone. Today we're going to cover Chapter 6 on motivation. So I'm going to break this chapter up into two lectures like I have done with other chapters. So this particular chapter is just going to deal with a small piece of Chapter 6, and then the second lecture will deal with primarily actually motivation, all right? So the learning objectives that we'll go over in today's lecture will strictly be 1 and 2. So we'll talk about diagnosing work problems, and then we'll look at this idea of ability being the issue. And then the next lecture that we'll look at will primarily focus on how to create this motivating environment for employees. So there's a couple different formulas that you see up here on the screen, and it's important to understand kind of what impacts performance. So if you look at the first equation, we have ability times motivation is what equals performance. So when performance is lacking, we really need to figure out, all right, is it an ability issue or is it a motivation issue? You know, what's impacting this employee's performance, or maybe the entire group of employees' performance. So then if we break those down a little bit further, we look at ability being aptitude, which is kind of the knowledge that you bring with you to the job, training that's been provided for you for this particular job, and the resources that's available. So again, those three things combined make up your ability, right? And so if your ability, right, if we figure out that this is an ability issue and we look at the things that make up ability, maybe this could be an easy fix, right? So performance is lacking. We diagnose that it's an ability issue, and we recognize that we don't have a lot of resources. Our budgets have been cut, and maybe we need to invest in some additional resources to increase this person's ability, which we would hopefully see an increase in their performance. Right? So that's the important part about understanding these equations, because we can find some maybe pretty simple solutions to help kind of solve some problems. And then if we look at motivation equals the desire times the commitment, right? So not only do you have the I want to do a good job, but are you committed to it, right? Are you easily distracted, or there's always an excuse, that type of thing. So I need both of those things, and the combination of those two things equal our motivation, and that can definitely have an impact on our performance. So an important part before we even jump into kind of these solutions, right? If we're having a performance issue, we need to figure out what's the problem, right? We recognize that their performance is a problem, right? They're not meeting the goals that we've identified, they're missing deadlines, whatever it might be, but we need to say why, right? Is it because they're lacking the ability, or is it they're lacking the motivation? So some questions that you see up on the screen are questions to help maybe hone in on one of the reasons, right? So, how difficult are the tasks? How capable is the individual? How hard is the individual even trying to succeed? How much improvement is the individual making, right? All these things, depending on how I answer these questions on this particular individual, could help us, identify if it's more of an ability problem or a motivation problem. So we want to spend a lot of time getting the problem right, because if I diagnose this performance issue as an ability problem and it's really not, all the solutions that I'm going to employ are not going to help. It's going to cause a lot of frustration, and we're going to get probably, we're most likely going to have a negative impact on their performance overall. So, spending time here is definitely important, and something that was, emphasized in the decision-making chapter. That first stage of identifying what the problem is crucial, right? And same thing here, right? If we have a problem, we really want to make sure we figure out if it's an ability or a motivation, or even a combination of both. But we want to know so we know what kind of solutions we can employ. If we decide that it's an ability problem, right? If we say this employee's performance is lacking, because of lack of ability. The tools that you see up on the screen are options for us, right? As managers, we can say, all right, here's what we can do to help this person, because that is our goal. Our goal is to help this person improve. We don't, the last step of the 5 tools is to release, is to fire the employee. And we really want to try to avoid that because that is a costly decision. It's a lengthy decision to get to that point and then to hire someone else in to get them up to speed, right? So there's a lot more involved in that step than maybe what we just initially think of, like, let's just get rid of the problem, right? Yeah, that's fast. We can get rid of them pretty fast. But now what does it look like to get someone else in? Okay. So let's look at some of our options. So our first one is to resupply. So if we go back to that equation, which ability is made up of aptitude, training, and resources, right? Maybe they're lacking resources. So I can simply resupply them, give them more resources if it's reasonable, right? I might be able to, maybe they're not able to get their reports done on time because I have X number of employees that have to share a computer. So maybe if I can get some additional resources, some additional computers, then that could potentially solve our problem, right? And so I want to assess that. So I want to go in order when I'm using these steps, but I don't necessarily have to try them all, right? But I at least want to think through them. So if I look at resupply, I might, like the previous example, say, you know what, they have 1 computer. Maybe I can try to get them a couple more, and that could really help their ability and help their performance. Or I could look out at the group or whatever and say, you know what, they really have all the resources that they need. They have plenty of computers. They have the equipment that they need. They have an adequate budget, whatever. So I might say, all right, resupply is not an option, right? Because they have the resources that they need. All right, so then I would move down to the second option, which is retrain. So I might say, maybe this person needs to be trained in this area. Maybe they've been promoted, but never, actually trained on this specific role. And so maybe just some training could help. And it doesn't have to be, an expensive training that I send the employee off to or bring in outside trainers. It could be on-the-job training. It could be partnering this person up with someone who does really well in this job, and helping them build a relationship or whatever, and do some training that way. So it doesn't always have to be expensive, but a lot of times we do lack training because it is an expense. And when budgets get cut, this is one of the areas that commonly gets cut. So I want to ask myself, has this employee been trained on these different tasks that I'm expecting them to do? And if not, maybe this is an easy option, an easy solution to employ. So options 1 and 2 are probably the easiest and the least threatening. So if I went to an employee and said, hey, I'm going to give you an extra computer to help you meet those deadlines, most likely they're going to welcome that. All right, same thing with some training. I'm going to give you some extra training to help you increase your comfort level and your skill set in this area, right? Most of the time, employees are going to welcome those types of solutions, right? So we want to kind of recognize that, and that's why we would want to employ those first, because they're not very they don't cost a lot, and they're not very threatening. Step 3, or tool 3, is refit. And so this essentially would look like I leave the person in their current job, but I take away some of their tasks. I kind of refit the job around what they're good at. Okay, so the really idea is that I'm going to take away whatever they're struggling with, let them kind of focus in on the things that they excel at, and then maybe slowly reintroduce those things back into the job. Okay, so long term, the goal would be to get that person to be able to fully do all those things as originally planned. The biggest downside to refitting is if I take away a piece of their job or a couple aspects of their job, those pieces have to go somewhere. So they either land on my plate as the manager, or I disperse them to others in the department. And, short term, people are okay doing more and not getting paid more, right? Most likely I'm not increasing anybody's pay. I'm just kind of expecting them to do this. But long term, it can cause some resentment if I'm constantly getting things added to my plate and this other person over here is doing less and getting paid the same, right? Because a lot of times during this refitting stage doesn't necessarily mean that salary or wages are being changed, right? So this should be really more of a short-term type of solution, and then slowly, re-enter those other aspects back into that person's job. 4 is reassign. So if 3 does not work, or maybe 3 is not an option, I don't have anyone to give these, those aspects to, then I might say, I need to reassign this person. So the difference here is reassigning is taking that person out of that job and placing them in a completely different role. And again, you want to do this not just to get rid of this problem employee, right, which is probably what we're thinking as the manager. I'm sick of dealing with this employee, their performance issues. I just want to get rid of them. You want to make sure that you're getting rid of them into a job where you really think that they can be successful. So if an opening in another department, another area of the organization becomes available, and you truly think that their skill set is a better fit in that other role, then that's an opportunity to reassign them. All right, because you want to see your employees succeed, and you don't want to just move a problem from one area to another, right? You really want to move this employee into an area where they can succeed. So that would be the idea behind reassigning. And then number 5 is release. So obviously getting rid of the employee. And so a couple things to think about with release. Most likely HR, if you go to HR and you say, I got to fire this employee, I want to get rid of them, you're going to need some documentation. You're going to need to show that you've done some things to help the employee and their performance still hasn't improved. And now we're at this kind of last step. All right, so HR is going to want to see that documentation. If you followed these steps, if you've gone through steps 1 through 4, maybe not implemented all of them, but implemented 1 or 2 of them and considered some, and you've documented how you've done those things, the reaction to those things, and whatever, the outcomes, that's great documentation to show HR that this isn't a good fit anymore. It's not good for the employee. It's not good for us. So we need to release this employee. And at that point, both parties are probably going to be okay with that. The employee doesn't want to consistently fail, not meet expectations. And the organization obviously doesn't want to see an employee continually kind of fail like that as well. And so again, going through these steps will help provide that documentation that HR is actually going to want when you get to that release stage. The other reason why you wouldn't want to just jump to release, all right, so besides the fact that most likely you're not going to be able to do that, you're going to need that documentation. The other reason is if I release someone and I don't at least entertain steps 1 and 2 of resupply or retrain, and I realize that maybe it's really a resource problem. Like if we go back to the example that I shared at the very beginning with the computer, I have an employee who never gets his reports in on time. And I recognize that they have one computer that they have to share within on that floor or whatever it might be. If I don't recognize that and I just jump to releasing the employee, right? So I release that employee. I start recruiting for a new employee. I hire that employee. The employee goes through some orientation programs. And at best, 3 months later, I have now another employee in that role. But I still only have one computer. So most likely, someone's going to continue to struggle, right? The last one to the computer, or however that gets worked, it's still going to be an issue. So I've just gone through that whole release, recruiting, and hiring just to most likely have the same problems still be present. So I really encourage taking these steps, thinking through at least each of these different tools, so we can make the best decisions not only for our employees but for the organization as well, right? And ideally, that's going to help their ability. And if our ability is improved, then we would hope to see an improvement in their performance. All right. So those are the five R's to improving ability. All right. Pretty simple stuff, but it just takes some time to kind of work through them for each employee. All right. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.